It begins in silence. The kind of silence that presses against the skin and hums in the bones, broken only by the faint electrical buzz of fluorescent lights and the slow, rhythmic hum of vending machines standing like sentinels in an empty hallway. The camera drifts through this half-lit world, the world of the night shift. A world that belongs to no one and everyone, where time slows and even air seems thicker. The narrator's voice is calm but uneasy, a whisper that cuts through the stillness like static. They speak of how night work changes people, how the mind begins to twist when it realizes it's awake while the rest of the world dreams. There's something unnatural about the stillness, something ancient in the way the dark folds around these places. Hospitals, gas stations, warehouses, cemeteries, the spaces where only the forgotten remain awake. We move through a series of snapshots. A nurse scribbling notes beneath buzzing lights, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. A janitor pushing a mop across a floor so polished it reflects his hollow stare. A cashier counting money with trembling hands as the neon sign outside flickers, open though no one's coming. Each of them is alive, breathing, but the emptiness that surrounds them makes them look like ghosts. The camera lingers on their faces, tired, pale, expressionless, before fading into the next. The narrator talks of how the human mind begins to hear things after 3 a.m., how the silence grows teeth, and the smallest sound, a door hinge, a footstep, a sigh, can make the heart convulse in the chest. The scene shifts to a wide shot of a city at night, windows dark, streets deserted. A thin fog curling around lampposts like breath on cold glass. Somewhere in that vast stillness, there are those who work through the dark. The ones who punch in when others dream. They are the night's caretakers, its watchers, its forgotten souls. A close-up of a wristwatch ticking loudly fills the silence. 2:37 a.m. The clock hand trembles slightly as if unsure whether to move forward or stop. A faint whisper, unintelligible at first, fades in. It sounds like radio static, a voice bleeding through from another frequency. The narrator lowers their voice, speaking slower now, describing how the night isn't empty. It's simply full of things we can't see. For centuries, people have spoken about it. The footsteps behind them when they're alone, the whispers in the empty hall, the shadow that lingers in the reflection but not in the room. The night shift is where the veil thins. When the living and the dead, the real and the imagined, overlap like two images fighting for focus. The visuals grow darker. A hallway stretches endlessly under flickering white light. The walls breathe softly, or maybe it's just the hum of electricity. A distant clang echoes, metallic and hollow, followed by the sound of running water. Somewhere, a radio clicks on by itself. A soft old tune playing through distortion, like the voice of someone who shouldn't still be speaking. The narrator's tone shifts from calm to cautious, describing how the story, and the 7 to come, aren't legends or campfire tales. They are real accounts told by those who survived. The ones who saw something during the hours when humanity sleeps and the world is unguarded. The tension builds slowly, almost imperceptibly. The hum of the lights grows louder. The shadows deepen. The ticking clock speeds up. Then, abruptly, silence. The kind that makes your pulse audible. The narrator's breath lingers in that void for a moment before they whisper. It's easy to think horror belongs to the daylight, to stories and screens. But the truth is, the real fear lives in the hours you never see. A soft gust of wind brushes past. The lights flicker out, and the last thing visible is a long hospital corridor stretching into pitch black. The vending machine hum dies. Somewhere in the dark, a faint call bell chimes once, sharp and lonely. The narrator's final words echo softly. Let's start with the first story, one that turned an ordinary hospital ward into a place of pure horror. The sound fades to a heartbeat, slow and distant, and the screen dissolves into the pale glow of hospital lights. The first story begins. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the hallways like a constant low whisper, blending with the faint beeps of heart monitors and the soft hiss of air conditioning vents. It was 2:37 a.m. That strange hour between night and morning when reality feels like it's holding its breath. Clara adjusted her nurse badge and rubbed her tired eyes. It was her first week working the night shift at St. Augustine's Care Unit, a small, aging hospital tucked away on the edge of town. The other nurses had gone home hours ago. Tonight, she was covering alone, the only one on duty for the entire floor. The silence was too heavy. Even the machines seemed reluctant to make noise. Clara moved through the corridor, pushing her cart, the wheels squeaking faintly against the polished floor. She checked each room, each patient, carefully documenting vitals. Most of them were asleep, their breaths shallow but steady. Everything felt ordinary, almost peaceful, until the nurse call light for room 12 blinked on. Clara froze. Room 12 had been empty since Tuesday. The patient who stayed there, an elderly man named Mr. Harmon, had passed away 2 nights ago. She remembered how kind he'd been, how he'd told her stories about his childhood just hours before his heart stopped. She remembered being the one who covered his face with a sheet. The room had been cleaned, his belongings removed. It shouldn't have been occupied. The soft red light above the door pulsed, steady and rhythmic. Clara tried to laugh it off, convincing herself it must be a wiring glitch. The building was old, things malfunctioned all the time. Still, her steps felt heavier as she approached the door. She hesitated, fingers brushing the handle, her reflection wavering faintly in the glass window of the door. The moment she opened it, the sound hit her. A faint buzzing, like static whispering through the air. The bed was neatly made. The monitor beside it flickered softly, displaying nothing but snowy static, though it wasn't even plugged in. Clara felt her stomach twist. She backed out, heart racing, and reached for her walkie to call maintenance. But before she could press the button, the sound of the call light dinged again. Same room. She turned sharply, but this time, the hallway lights dimmed for just a moment. A draft of cold air swept past her legs, the kind that feels wrong inside a sealed building. She tried to calm herself. "It's fine," she whispered, half to herself. "Just a glitch, just the system acting up." Her voice cracked slightly at the end. She walked back to the nurse station, forcing herself to focus on charting, but she couldn't shake the sound, that faint electrical hum from room 12. Then the intercom on the wall crackled to life. "Clara?" The voice was soft, familiar, male. Her hand went cold. "Hello?" she said quickly, leaning toward the speaker. "Who is this?" Nothing, just a hiss of static. Then again, drawn out and quieter. "Clara?" She backed away, breath trembling. Her mind scrambled for logic. Maybe another nurse? Patient? A prank? But no one else was on her floor. The ward was locked. She checked the intercom log. It showed no incoming transmissions. The hall was silent again, except for her own breathing. She forced herself to return to her rounds, telling herself she wouldn't let a little malfunction shake her. As she passed room 12 again, she noticed something she hadn't before. The door was slightly open, just enough for the faint light to spill across the floor. Her body moved before her mind agreed, her hand trembling as she nudged it wider. The bed was no longer empty. A shape sat on the edge of it, slumped forward, shoulders hunched, the pale outline of a man's hospital gown visible in the faint glow. The same bed where Mr. Harmon had died. Clara froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The figure turned slowly, neck stiff, revealing a gray, sagging face and hollow eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the half-dark. Its lips moved, forming the same word the intercom had whispered. "Clara." She stumbled backward, hitting the hallway wall, knocking her clipboard to the ground. The lights flickered violently now, shadows jumping across the walls like ghosts caught mid-scream. The figure stood, its hospital gown dragging along the floor, and took one step toward her. The room filled with static, louder and louder, until it drowned out everything, even the sound of her breath. She turned and ran, shoes slapping the tile, tears burning in her eyes. When she finally reached the elevator, she slammed the button again and again, whispering, "Come on, come on, come on." The doors opened with a slow metallic groan. As she stepped in, she saw her reflection in the stainless steel, pale, terrified, and behind her, For just a second figure standing at the end of the hallway, watching. Still, the doors closed, sealing her inside. The hum of the machinery surrounded her again, but the static hadn't stopped. It was coming from the elevator speaker now, faint but clear. A whisper, "Thank you for staying with me." By morning, Clara had already submitted her resignation. She told the supervisor she couldn't handle the hours, didn't mention what really happened. But in her final walk through the ward to collect her things, she passed room 12 one last time. The door was closed, the light off. Yet from inside, she swore she heard the faint sound of a heart monitor. A slow, steady beep. Outside, as dawn broke over the parking lot, Clara stood beneath the pale pink sky and took a deep breath, trying to convince herself it had all been exhaustion, stress, imagination. But deep down, she knew what she'd heard, what she'd seen. The narrator's voice returns, low and deliberate. Clara never worked another night shift again. But the nurses who replaced her say the call light from room 12 still flickers on every night at 2:37 a.m. The final image lingers on the hospital corridor, lights flickering in sequence, leading toward the closed door of room 12. One final chime echoes, soft, distant, impossible. Then silence. The fog rolled in thick over the cracked asphalt road that led to the highway gas station, swallowing the edges of the parking lot and softening the harsh glare of the flickering neon sign that read open 24 hours. Inside, the air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and cleaning solution, the hum of the coolers filling the silence like a low drone. Eddie sat behind the counter, his chin resting on his hand, eyes half-lidded as he scrolled through his phone. It was nearly 3 a.m. The loneliest part of the night, when even the air seemed to hold its breath. He'd been working the night shift for almost 2 years, a routine that had worn down the edges of his patience but also numbed him to fear. Nothing ever really happened here. The occasional drunk driver, the rare late-night traveler, a trucker or two passing through. Still, there was something about tonight that felt off. The silence was too absolute, the kind that pressed in from every direction. Even the crickets outside had gone quiet. Eddie stood, stretched, and moved toward the back counter to refill the coffee pot when the bell over the door chimed softly. He turned, expecting to see a driver or maybe one of the regulars, but what stood in the doorway made him pause. A man, tall, thin, soaked from the shoulders down, water dripping onto the mat, stood under the flickering light. His hood was pulled low over his face, shadowing his features, and his voice, when he finally spoke, was calm but strange. "Pump 3, he said. "Need a full tank." Eddie nodded automatically and rang it up. "Sure thing, man. Regular or premium?" The man didn't answer. He just turned his head slightly, as if listening for something far away, then whispered, "Just fill it up." His hand trembled slightly as he placed a few crumpled bills on the counter. Eddie frowned but said nothing. As he counted the money, he noticed the man's hand, pale with long fingers that looked unnaturally stiff, the skin a little too gray. The stranger turned and walked back outside. Eddie watched him through the glass, the fog swallowing him almost immediately. The sound of the door chime faded, replaced by the low hiss of the wind. A few seconds later, Eddie realized something odd. The security monitor above the counter showed pump 3 perfectly, but the camera feed was empty. No movement, no man, no car. Just fog. He blinked, leaned closer, then looked out the window again. Nothing. The pump sat idle, the nozzle still hanging in its holder. The man was gone. He stepped out from behind the counter, calling out, "Hey, you forgot to pump your gas." His voice echoed through the fog, unanswered. The chill of the air bit at his skin as he stepped outside. The mist was thick enough that he could barely see the edge of the parking lot. He walked toward pump 3, every footstep sounding unnaturally loud against the damp ground. The pump handle was slick, wet with condensation, and the display glowed with a faint light that flickered and dimmed. When he turned to head back inside, the doorbell chimed again. Once, then twice, though he could see no one entering. Eddie's heartbeat quickened. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, the warmth of the store wrapping around him like a fragile shield. "Hello?" he called out. "Anyone here?" His voice sounded too small against the silence. He glanced up at the security feed again and froze. On the screen, he saw himself standing at the counter, but behind him, a figure loomed. Tall, still, its soaked hood dripping onto the floor. Eddie spun around. No one was there. The floor behind him was dry. When he turned back to the monitor, the figure was gone, leaving only his own reflection staring back. He grabbed his phone, dialing his manager, but the line filled instantly with static. It wasn't the normal kind either. It pulsed, almost rhythmic, like breathing through a radio. A faint voice cut through it, distant but clear enough to make the hair on his neck rise. "You shouldn't have gone outside." The voice was low, the same tone as the man from moments ago. Eddie's stomach dropped. He dropped the phone, backing away slowly. His eyes darted toward the front window, and that's when he saw it. A face pressed against the glass, pale and blurred by the fog, staring straight at him. The mouth was slightly open, the eyes wide and unblinking. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. The lights above him flickered violently. One by one, the refrigerators in the back shut off, their hum dying in a rising wave of silence. The air grew colder. Eddie's breath came out in visible puffs. Somewhere behind him, the bell over the door chimed again, soft and slow. He didn't turn. He couldn't. He reached for the counter, grabbing the small flashlight kept there for power outages. Its weak beam cut through the dark, illuminating the aisles. Nothing. The sound of dripping water echoed softly, drip, 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 though the floor was dry. Then, on the far end of the store, a reflection caught his eye. The glass freezer door shimmered faintly, and through it, for just a second, he saw the hooded man standing behind him. Eddie spun, the flashlight beam slicing the air. Empty. He stumbled back, knocking over a rack of chips, his breath coming in sharp bursts. He looked again at the camera monitor. It showed him standing there, panting, and behind him, once again, the man, closer this time. The stranger's face now visible under the hood. Gray skin, sunken eyes, and lips parted as if trying to speak. The flashlight flickered. The static returned. And then, in the reflection of the front window, Eddie saw the man right behind him, his mouth moving slowly, whispering words that didn't match the sound in his ears. Eddie screamed, the sound swallowed instantly by the fog pressing against the glass. When the police arrived hours later after a customer reported the store locked but lights on, they found no sign of struggle, just the front door open, the coffee still warm, and the faint smell of rain. The security tapes played fine until 3:03 a.m. When they glitched, the footage showed Eddie standing at the counter, staring into the camera, his expression blank. Then the screen went black. The narrator's voice returns, calm but cold. The investigators never found him. No footprints, no fingerprints, no evidence of anyone else entering or leaving. But every few months, the new clerks swear they hear the door chime at 3:03 a.m., followed by wet footprints leading to pump 3, and a man's voice asking, "Just fill it up." The final image lingers on the empty gas station. Fog rolling through the lot, the neon sign flickering one last time before cutting to black. The night stretched long and cold across the freight yard, the air thick with the smell of oil, rust, and rain-soaked steel. Massive cargo containers stood like sleeping giants in endless rows, their metal sides slick with condensation. The distant rumble of a passing train faded into the dark horizon, leaving behind only the metallic echo of clanging tracks and the low hiss of the wind weaving through the labyrinth of rail lines. Marcus adjusted his heavy coat and rubbed his hands together, his flashlight beam cutting through the mist as he began his 2 a.m. inspection route. He had worked the freight yard for nearly a decade, long enough to know its language, the groans of settling steel, the distant grind of machinery, the creak of metal shifting in the cold. Tonight, though, the rhythm felt wrong. The yard was too quiet. Even the usual hum of the generators seemed softer, swallowed by the fog that hung thick over the rails. He'd always preferred working nights where he could think without interruption, but lately, that quiet solitude had started to feel more like isolation. Marcus reached the far end of the yard, where the older freight cars sat idle, waiting for decommissioning. Their paint had peeled away, revealing raw metal streaked with rust. He checked off each car on his clipboard, his breath forming white ghosts in the air. That's when he noticed it. One of the old boxcars, marked with faded graffiti, was slightly open, just enough for the beam of his flashlight to catch the edge of the latch. He frowned. That car had been sealed for months. He approached slowly, the gravel crunching under his boots. The fog seemed to thicken as he neared it, muting every sound except the distant moan of the wind. He reached for the door, fingers brushing the cold steel, and pushed. The hinges groaned like something alive. The door slid open just enough for him to peer inside. His light swept across the dark interior, empty mostly until it caught something near the far corner. Small handprints smeared across the inside wall. Tiny ones, too small for an adult. Marcus froze. The handprints were faint, outlined in a thin layer of grime, and they trailed downward, as though someone had pressed against the wall, trying to claw their way out. He felt his chest tighten, his pulse quickening. He took a step back, scanning the ground for any sign of recent disturbance, but the gravel was undisturbed. Still, the air inside the boxcar felt wrong, colder, heavier. He turned to close it, but just as his hand touched the latch, his radio crackled. A burst of static, followed by a distorted voice. "Come in, anyone. Hear me?" It was faint, fragmented. Marcus pressed the button. "Yeah, I hear you. Who's this?" No answer. Only more static, like someone breathing through the line. Then, just barely audible, "We never made it home." The words sent a chill crawling up his spine. He stepped away from the boxcar, glancing around the fog-shrouded yard. "Who is this?" he asked again, but the radio went dead. He tapped it, but the light on it flickered once, then went dark. Somewhere in the distance, metal clanged sharply, like something being dropped. He turned toward the sound, sweeping his flashlight through the fog. The beam caught movement, the brief outline of a figure walking between the cars. Too far to make out details, but the shape was unmistakably human. Marcus started toward it, calling out, "Hey, you're not supposed to be here." The figure didn't respond. It slipped behind another car, disappearing into the haze. Marcus quickened his pace, boots crunching over wet gravel. As he rounded the corner, his light caught a flash of color. A small red toy truck lying on the ground. It looked old, the paint chipped and faded. He bent to pick it up, feeling the weight of cold metal in his palm. When he turned it over, he saw something scratched crudely into the underside. A name, Tommy. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a faint sound with it, laughter. A child's laugh, distant but distinct. Marcus froze, his breath catching. He swung his flashlight toward the sound, but the beam illuminated only fog. The laughter came again, echoing between the cars. High, soft, and utterly out of place in the desolate yard. "Hello?" he called out, voice trembling now. "Is someone there?" No answer. Only the whistle of wind sliding through steel. He turned back toward his truck, deciding he'd had enough for the night. As he walked, the laughter followed him, faint at first, then closer. When he looked back, the boxcar he'd opened was now fully ajar, swinging gently. Inside, something moved, a flicker of motion, like a shadow crossing deeper into the dark. He raised the flashlight again, but the beam flickered, struggling. The batteries were dying. The air around him felt colder now, heavy with the metallic scent of rain and something else. Something sour, like decay. The radio crackled to life once more. The same voice, closer this time, whispering through static. "We never made it home." Marcus turned and ran. His boots pounded the ground, echoing across the rails. He didn't stop until he reached the main office. He slammed the door shut and leaned against it, chest heaving. He tried to call dispatch, but the landline emitted nothing but a low, continuous hum. The clock on the wall ticked faintly, each second stretching longer than it should. Then came the sound again. The creak of metal, slow and rhythmic, as if something enormous were shifting outside. He looked out through the office window. The yard was empty, still wrapped in fog. But one of the freight cars, the same one he'd opened, was now rolling slowly down the track on its own. No engine, no wind, no movement of air. Just gliding, silent and steady, until it disappeared into the mist. Marcus stood there until dawn. When the morning crew arrived, they found him outside by the tracks, pale and shaking, holding the small red toy truck in his hand. He never returned to work. Later that week, his supervisor checked the yard logs. The boxcar's serial number, 2719, had been decommissioned in 1987, part of a train that derailed, killing an entire family riding illegally inside one of the cars. The youngest victim had been a boy named Tommy. The narrator's voice returns, steady and haunting. They say sometimes, when the fog is thick and the yard goes quiet, you can still hear the radio crackle to life, a child's laughter echoing between the cars. And the same message, whispered through static, we never made it home. The sound fades beneath the low rumble of a passing freight train, its horn echoing into the endless dark before silence claims the yard once more. The mall after midnight felt like a different world entirely. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, casting long, sterile shadows across polished floors that reflected the emptiness like mirrors. Every store was locked, the metal gates drawn tight, their glossy display mannequins frozen mid-pose behind glass. The air conditioning droned softly through the vents, but beneath it was a silence that felt almost sentient, like something listening. Dan adjusted the strap of his flashlight and made his way down the west corridor, the rubber soles of his boots echoing too loudly against the tile. He'd been a night security guard at North Hill Mall for 3 years. He didn't mind the solitude. In fact, he liked it. The paycheck was decent and the job was quiet, most nights anyway. His shift ran from midnight to 6. Every hour, he was required to patrol the entire mall, check the security feeds, and report anything unusual. But tonight, something felt wrong before it even began. The first sign came at 12:17 a.m. when the radio at his desk crackled to life with faint static. No one spoke, just a hiss, followed by what sounded like faint breathing. Dan frowned, adjusted the frequency, and the noise vanished. He shrugged it off, telling himself it was just interference. But the longer he sat watching the feeds on the security monitors, the heavier the air began to feel. The monitors lined the wall in front of him, showing every wing of the mall from multiple angles. Empty food court tables, darkened escalators, a carousel of mannequins in the department store. The image on screen 4 flickered suddenly, and Dan leaned forward. It was showing him. He could see himself sitting in the security office watching the screens, his posture identical. Only one thing was off on the monitor. He wasn't looking at the screens. He was staring straight into the camera. Dan blinked, leaned closer. For a second, he thought maybe it was a reflection, or the monitor was glitching. But the image moved. His other self on the screen tilted his head slightly, just a fraction, like he knew he was being watched. Then the screen went black. He exhaled shakily, rubbing his face. Okay, he muttered. Too much coffee. He switched to a different feed. Everything looked normal. He sat back, forcing himself to focus on his patrol checklist. But somewhere deep down, unease had rooted itself in his chest. At 1 a.m., he began his next round. The mall was darker now, most of the lights dimmed to half power. The only sound was the occasional creak of metal and the buzz of a vending machine at the far end of the hall. His flashlight beam swept across the empty food court, chairs stacked neatly on tables. As he turned down the corridor toward the old arcade, the intercom above him let out a sharp burst of static. Dan, his name, whispered, quiet but unmistakable. He froze, eyes darting to the speaker above. Who's there? He called, his voice echoing faintly. No response. He stood still for a moment, the sound of his own heartbeat loud in his ears. Then, just as suddenly, the intercom went dead. He continued walking, scanning each storefront as he passed. The air was cold, unnaturally so. Near the arcade entrance, he noticed movement in the reflection of the glass. A faint silhouette passing behind him. He turned quickly, shining his flashlight. Nothing. The reflection, however, still showed someone standing there, several feet behind him. The figure was faint, distorted by the curved glass, but its stance mirrored his own. Dan's breath hitched. He reached up, touching the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Control, this is Dan. I've got a possible intruder near the arcade, requesting confirmation on the cameras." Static. He tried again, louder. "Control, do you read?" Only a low hum came through, then silence. He turned back toward the security office, his pace quickening. The long corridors seemed endless now, stretching farther than they should. When he passed one of the mirrored storefronts, he caught a glimpse of himself again, but the reflection didn't match his movements. The mirrored version was still walking when he had already stopped. It turned its head toward him, its expression hollow, eyes black pools in the glass. Dan stumbled back, the flashlight shaking in his grip. The reflection smiled. Just a small twitch of the mouth before the overhead lights flickered and the image vanished. By the time he reached the security office, sweat had gathered on his forehead. He slammed the door behind him, locking it. The monitors glowed softly, each one showing empty hallways. He scanned them quickly, his hand hovering over the radio. Everything seemed still. Then, on the far left monitor, he saw something that froze his blood. A figure, dressed in his same uniform, was walking down the west corridor. The exact corridor he had just come from. The movement was slow, deliberate, head tilted slightly downward. Dan leaned closer to the screen, his throat dry. The camera feed timestamp read 1:27 a.m. Live. He watched himself walking on screen. Only he was sitting here, watching. The other version of him reached the arcade entrance and paused. Slowly, it lifted its head, and though the camera resolution was low, the face that stared up looked just like his. Pale, expressionless, eyes blackened by shadow. Dan's voice trembled. What is this?" He tried to switch the camera, but the feed glitched. For a split second, every screen in front of him displayed the same image. His own face, multiplied across a dozen monitors, each one slightly delayed, like an echo frozen in time. Then the power went out. Darkness swallowed the room. The hum of the generators outside faltered, the silence so thick it hurt. Dan turned on his flashlight, the narrow beam illuminating the desk. His radio sputtered again, faint static filtering through. Then, in between the distortion, his own voice came through. "Patrol complete. Heading to the arcade." He dropped the radio, heart hammering in his chest. That was the exact line he had said an hour ago. The voice on the other end was repeating him word for word like a recording, but it wasn't a recording. The tone, the pauses, the breath, it was live. From the corridor outside, the sound of footsteps began. Slow, heavy, getting closer. Dan held his breath, backing away from the door. The footsteps stopped right outside. He could see a shadow beneath the gap. A pair of boots, facing the door. Then, faintly, the doorknob rattled once. He lifted his flashlight toward the small observation window in the door, his heart pounding so loud it filled the silence. For a moment, nothing. Then a face appeared on the other side of the glass. His own face, eyes wide, mouth slack, staring directly at him. Dan stumbled backward, tripping over the chair. The lights above flickered once, twice, then came back on. The shadow was gone. When the morning guard arrived at 6 a.m., the office was empty. The monitors still played, and on one of them, Dan could be seen walking the hallways, flashlight in hand, moving in perfect loops as if repeating the same route forever. The narrator's voice drops to a whisper, calm but laced with dread. "They never found Dan, but the new guards say that if you check the West Corridor cameras after 1 a.m., you can still see him making his rounds, always just a few seconds out of sync." The final shot lingers on the glowing monitors, all showing the same corridor, all showing the same man walking endlessly, one step behind himself. The hum of the lights fades, replaced by a faint echo of footsteps disappearing into static. The diner sat on the edge of an empty highway, a single oasis of light in the endless dark. The neon sign outside buzzed faintly, the word "open," flickering like it was struggling to stay alive. Inside, The air smelled of coffee and old grease, the faint melody of an old jukebox playing through static. It was almost 3 a.m., and Maggie, the night waitress, stood behind the counter, refilling the same cup of coffee for the 5th time. She had worked here for 8 years, long enough to know every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the freezer, and every trucker story that passed through. But tonight, something about the air felt different, heavy, still, like the night itself was holding its breath. Outside, fog had rolled in, thick and milky, swallowing the empty parking lot. Maggie could barely see the outlines of the cars parked out front. The highway beyond was just a smear of gray. She leaned against the counter, her eyes growing heavy with fatigue, when the bell above the door chimed. Startled her. She looked up, the sound sharp and clear in the silence, but no one stood there. The door was closed. She frowned, walking around the counter toward the entrance. She looked outside through the glass, seeing only the reflection of her tired face staring back. She exhaled slowly, shaking her head. She turned back toward the counter and froze. There was a man sitting at the far booth. She hadn't heard him come in. He sat perfectly still, his back straight, his hands folded neatly on the table. A long black coat draped over his shoulders, glistening slightly as though damp from rain. His face was pale, sharp-featured, and expressionless. His eyes, however, were strange, dark, glassy, and so still that for a moment she wondered if he was even blinking. Maggie tried to shake off the chill crawling up her spine. She approached him slowly, forcing a polite smile. "Evenin'. Coffee?" The man didn't answer at first. He just stared past her, his gaze fixed somewhere distant, like he was watching something behind her. Finally, in a low, dry voice, he said, "Yes, please." She nodded, retreating to the counter. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured the coffee, the faint clink of the cup and saucer echoing in the empty diner. When she turned back, the man was gone. Her stomach dropped. She looked around, the booth empty, the hallway to the restrooms dark. "Sir?" she called, voice unsteady. No answer. She stepped closer to the booth, touching the table. The surface was cold, but the cup of coffee she had just poured was still sitting there, steam rising in slow curls. Her breath hitched. She glanced toward the counter again, and he was standing there, right at the counter. He was closer now, his coat dripping faintly onto the tiled floor, though there had been no rain outside. Maggie stumbled back a step, clutching the coffee pot. The man's face was calm, but there was something wrong about his eyes. They were glassy and unfocused, like they were staring through her rather than at her. "Sir, you startled me," she stammered. "I didn't hear you walk over." He tilted his head slightly, his voice even softer now. "Do you hear it?" She blinked. "Hear what?" The man smiled faintly. A small, unsettling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The knocking." Maggie froze. The diner was silent. No knocking, no sound at all. But then, faintly, from somewhere deep inside the building, maybe the kitchen, came a soft tap-tap-tap. Her stomach clenched. She turned slowly toward the sound. The tapping continued, rhythmic, deliberate, like knuckles against metal. The man didn't move. He just stood there, watching her. Maggie's voice shook. "It's probably just the pipes. Happens sometimes when..." The tapping grew louder. Then it stopped. She turned back toward the man, but he was gone again. Her pulse raced. She spun in a slow circle, scanning the diner, the empty booths, the restrooms, the entrance. Nothing. She hurried to the counter, picking up the phone, but the line was dead. Static whispered faintly in the receiver. The jukebox flickered. Then it came to life. An old country tune playing, distorted and warped like a broken record. The melody was slow, too slow, dragging unnaturally. Maggie's breath came faster. She backed away from the counter, eyes darting to every shadow. The lights flickered once. When they came back on, the man was sitting in the booth again. This time he wasn't alone. Someone sat across from him, a young woman with long dark hair. She looked pale, soaked through, her head bowed as if asleep. Maggie's mouth went dry. She stepped closer, squinting to see. The woman's clothes looked familiar. A pale blue uniform, just like Maggie's own. The same name tag glinted under the dim light. Maggie. Her hands went cold. She stared at the booth, her body trembling. The man lifted his eyes toward her again. "You shouldn't be here anymore," he said softly. The lights cut out. The sound of the jukebox warped into static. The knocking returned, this time all around her, coming from the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. She dropped the coffee pot, glass shattering across the tiles. Her breath hitched in short, panicked bursts as she stumbled backward, reaching for the flashlight under the counter. She clicked it on, the beam slicing through the darkness. The diner was empty again. The booth, the counter, the man, the woman, all gone. Except, in the reflection of the diner's front glass, she could see them still sitting there, unmoving. The man looked straight ahead. The woman, her double, slowly lifted her head and turned toward Maggie's reflection. Her face was pale and swollen, eyes sunken and lifeless, water dripping down her chin. She smiled faintly, a distorted echo of Maggie's own nervous smile. The flashlight flickered once, then went dead. The next morning, when the day staff arrived, they found the diner empty. The coffee machine was still warm. 2 cups sat on the far booth table, both half full, both cold. The jukebox was playing softly, a slow country song that no one remembered putting on. And on the window, faintly fogged into the glass, were the prints of 2 hands pressed against it from the inside, one large, one small. The narrator's voice returns, calm but trembling at the edges, like they're afraid of the story themselves. Some say she must have fallen asleep during her shift, dreaming with her eyes open. Others say the diner was built on the remains of an old rest stop where a woman drowned decades ago. But every year, around that same night, the staff swear they see lights on in the diner long after it's closed. And sometimes, if you stop by the window, you can see her there, pouring coffee for a stranger who never leaves. The sound fades, the faint buzz of the neon sign returning, flickering through static. The last shot lingers on the empty diner, bathed in pale blue light, with a soft knock echoing once against the window. Tap, 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 before the screen cuts to black. The hospital morgue always felt wrong after midnight. It wasn't the smell, though the faint trace of antiseptic and old metal never left the air, or even the silence, which sat like a weight against the chest. It was the stillness, the kind that didn't just hang in the air but seemed to seep into the skin, into the bones, until it felt like the entire building was holding its breath. Leo, the night attendant, had worked there for almost a year. He was used to it, or at least he thought he was. But that night, everything felt off from the moment he clocked in. Started small. The motion sensor lights in the hallway near the storage unit kept flickering on by themselves, even though no one was there. The temperature dropped several degrees, his breath faintly visible as he moved between the drawers. He tried to laugh it off, telling himself it was just the old ventilation system. This place was decades old, and half the wiring was ancient. Still, something about the quiet unsettled him. It wasn't the usual peaceful quiet of a sleeping building. It was an expectant quiet, like something waiting for permission to move. Around 2:30 a.m., the intercom crackled faintly above him, just a flicker of static at first. Then came a voice, distorted but clear enough to make his blood run cold. "Help me." He froze mid-step, his gloved hand hovering over the clipboard. He glanced toward the speaker above the doorway. It was impossible. The intercom only connected to the nurse's station upstairs, and he was the only one scheduled down here. He hesitated, his heart pounding hard enough that he could hear it in his ears. "Hello?" he called out, his voice sounding too loud against the cold tiles. "Who's there?" No answer. The static faded, replaced by the low hum of the air vents. Leo tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. "Old wiring," he muttered. "Just old wiring." He went back to his routine, checking the names on the drawers, updating his logbook. But when he reached drawer 23B, he stopped. The tag on it was missing. That wasn't unusual, sometimes paperwork got misplaced. But when he checked the clipboard, there was no record of a 23B at all. The space where the name should have been was blank. A faint metallic sound echoed behind him. He turned sharply, his flashlight beam sweeping across the room. One of the drawers had shifted slightly open. Not enough to be dramatic, but just a few inches. Enough to break the seal. His throat tightened. He stepped closer, the squeak of his shoes the only sound in the silence. He reached out, hesitating, then gripped the drawer handle and slid it open. Empty. A wave of relief washed over him, followed quickly by confusion. Why would an empty drawer unlatch itself? He shook his head, pushing it shut again. It resisted slightly, like something was pressing from the inside. He shoved harder, the metal scraping. Finally, it closed with a hollow clang. He exhaled shakily. "I need a vacation," he muttered. Then the drawer below it, 24B, slid open by itself. Slowly, deliberately, the cold air from within brushed against his legs. Leo stumbled backward, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The drawer stopped halfway open, darkness pooling inside. He could see the faint outline of a white sheet within. The toe tag fluttered faintly in the draft. He leaned forward, just enough to read it. But there was no name, just one word, written in black ink. Leo. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. He dropped the flashlight, the beam spinning wildly across the walls before landing on his reflection in the metal drawers. Pale, wide-eyed, trembling. The intercom crackled again. This time, the voice was closer, clearer. "It's cold down here." He spun toward the sound. "Who's there?" The silence returned. Then, faintly, from the other end of the room, a soft creak. One of the gurneys had begun to roll slowly forward, its wheels squeaking against the tile. Leo backed away instinctively, his mind screaming that this wasn't possible. The gurney stopped near the center of the room. The sheet on top shifted slightly. He felt the air change, heavier, colder, like the oxygen was being pulled out of the space. His throat felt tight. He forced himself to move, grabbing the edge of the gurney. "Okay," he whispered to himself. "It's just air pressure. Just air pressure." He reached for the sheet. The lights went out. Total darkness swallowed him. The only sound was his breathing, fast, shallow, and the faint creak of the metal beneath his hands. Then, near his ear, so close it made his skin crawl, a whisper. "Don't." Leo stumbled backward, slamming into the wall. His flashlight flickered back to life, its weak beam cutting through the dark. The gurney was empty. The sheet lay flat, but the drawer labeled Leo was now fully open. Something inside moved. It was subtle, a shift, a faint sound of fabric brushing against metal. Then a pale hand reached out from the darkness within, fingers curling over the edge of the drawer. Leo screamed, dropping the flashlight. The beam rolled across the floor, catching glimpses of movement. A figure crawling out, its skin gray, veins dark beneath translucent flesh. The eyes were open but lifeless, the mouth slightly ajar as if gasping for air. Its chest rose and fell with shallow, wheezing breaths that shouldn't have been possible. Leo stumbled toward the door, fumbling for his keys, but the lock jammed. Behind him, the dragging sound of bare feet on tile grew louder. He pounded on the door. "Help! Somebody help!" His voice echoed through the halls, but no one answered. The intercom crackled one last time, the voice calm now. Familiar. His own. "It's cold down here." The lights flickered once, twice, then everything went still. When the morning staff arrived, they found the room undisturbed. The logs ended abruptly at 2:47 a.m. The final entry, a scrawl of his name. The drawers were all sealed, except for one. 23B, slightly ajar, with a new tag attached. It read simply, Leonard Pierce, 1987 to 2023. The narrator's voice returns, soft and reverent now, barely above a whisper. They said it must have been exhaustion, that maybe he fainted and hit his head. But the temperature logs showed something impossible. Between 2:30 and 3 a.m., the room dropped to -10 degrees, and every security camera froze for exactly 13 minutes. The footage restarted with all the drawers closed, except one. 23B. The scene fades into darkness, the faint hum of the morgue returning like a heartbeat beneath the silence. The final sound is a single metallic clang, the sound of a drawer sliding shut. The gas station sat alone on the outskirts of town, surrounded by miles of empty highway and fields that disappeared into the dark. The sign above it buzzed faintly, a hollow flicker of red neon reading 24 hours, though no one ever came after midnight. Inside, the lights were harsh and sterile, humming over rows of chips and dusty soda cans. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have, filling the silence with a strange rhythm that didn't quite match real time. Eli, the night clerk, was halfway through his fourth cup of coffee when the wind outside shifted. It wasn't strong, just enough to rattle the windows and make the door creak against its hinges. He looked up from the counter, rubbing his eyes. The clock said 2:41 a.m. The hour when the night felt endless and even the smallest sound could make the mind play tricks. He got up to stretch, glancing at the security monitor behind the counter. The grainy black and white feeds showed the parking lot, the aisles, and the fuel pumps outside. Empty. As usual. He turned away for just a second, and when his eyes flicked back, a car was there. A black sedan. No headlights, no sound of an engine, just sitting at the far pump. The figure inside wasn't moving. Eli frowned. Finally, a customer, he muttered, forcing a chuckle to mask the sudden unease crawling up his neck. He pushed open the door, the bell above it chiming softly, and stepped into the cool night air. The wind had died completely. Everything was still. Even the hum of insects was gone. He walked toward the car slowly. The fog that had been drifting across the lot seemed to thicken around it, wrapping the vehicle in a pale haze. When he reached it, he realized the car was idling, but he couldn't hear the engine. The sound was gone, yet the faint vibration beneath his feet told him it was running. He leaned toward the driver's window and tapped it lightly. "Hey, buddy, you paying with card or cash?" No response. The window was tinted so dark he couldn't see inside. He knocked again, harder this time. "You okay in there?" Still nothing. He tried to peer through the windshield, but the fog clung to the glass like smoke. Then, slowly, the driver's window rolled down about 2 inches, all on its own. Eli stepped back slightly, unease prickling through his body. The inside of the car was pitch black, as if it swallowed the light from his flashlight. "Look, if you need help," a voice interrupted him, soft and flat. "Don't go inside." Eli froze. The voice didn't sound right. It was distant, hollow, as though it came from a speaker underwater. "Sorry, what?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Don't go inside," it repeated. He glanced back at the gas station. The fluorescent lights flickered once, then twice. The faint outline of someone or something moved behind the counter inside. He turned back to the car. "Who are you?" But the window had rolled back up. The car was empty again. Eli took a shaky step backward, staring through the windshield. The fog shifted slightly, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw a face inside. Pale, expressionless, eyes too wide, watching him. Then it was gone. The car headlights flickered on, blinding white, and the engine roared to life. Before he could react, the car backed up fast, screeching out of the lot and disappearing into the dark highway. He stood there for several seconds, the echo of tires fading into the distance. Then he turned slowly toward the building. The figure he'd seen behind the counter was gone. The door hung slightly open, the bell above it swaying gently though no wind moved. He stepped back inside, pulse still pounding. The air felt different now. Thick, heavy, as though someone had been standing there moments before. He looked around. Everything was where it should be. The aisles, the counter, the humming fridge. But when he glanced at the security monitors, his stomach dropped. On one of the feeds, the black sedan was still there, parked right where it had been. He blinked, turning toward the window. The lot was empty. He looked back at the screen. The car was there again, the timestamp showed live footage. The driver's side door opened slowly, the darkness inside seeming to spill out onto the pavement like smoke. Then, from the car, something began to move. It wasn't walking so much as sliding forward, a dark shape that grew taller as it neared the camera. Its outline was human, but wrong, too thin, too long. As it reached the pump, the feed cut to static. Eli stumbled backward, nearly knocking over the stool behind the counter. The intercom crackled above him. A voice came through, distant and familiar. "Don't go inside." He looked up, his heart seizing. It was his voice. He stared at the microphone beside the register, his reflection faint in the black plastic. His hands trembled as he reached toward it. "Who is this?" he demanded. Silence. Then the static hissed again, louder this time, filling the room. He clamped his hands over his ears. The lights flickered once more, buzzing violently before plunging the station into total darkness. The hum of the refrigerators stopped. Even the clock stopped ticking. In the blackness, he could hear it, the soft sound of footsteps. Slow, measured, coming from the aisles. He grabbed his flashlight and shone it toward the shelves. For a split second, the beam caught movement, the outline of someone standing at the far end. A man tall, wearing a dark coat, his head tilted slightly. Then the light flickered, and he was gone. Eli moved quickly toward the door, but when he reached it, the handle wouldn't turn. He yanked it harder. Nothing. He turned around, the aisles were empty again. Then, from the far side of the room, came a faint, rhythmic sound. Tapping. Slow and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the counter. He walked toward it cautiously, his breath trembling in his throat. The sound stopped as he reached it. He lifted the flashlight. The register was open, and inside was a single folded receipt. He unfolded it with shaking hands. There was no writing, just 3 words stamped in red ink. "Check the cameras." He turned to the monitor wall again. The feeds flickered, jumping between static and short bursts of imagery. Counters. Parking lot. Then, for a second, the camera on pump 4 showed something that made his blood run cold, himself standing outside near the black car. But he was here, inside, watching. On the screen, his other self turned toward the camera slowly, his mouth moving. No sound came through, but he could read the lips clearly. "Don't go inside." The screen glitched violently, the images distorting and looping. Eli stumbled back, his vision spinning, the air around him growing cold. He reached for the power switch behind the counter, but the light above him exploded, showering glass. He covered his face, dropping to the floor. When he looked up again, everything was dark. Only one thing remained lit, the clock. Its hands were spinning wildly, the ticking sound louder and faster until it became a continuous mechanical whine. Then it stopped abruptly. 3 a.m. The front door creaked open by itself. Eli's flashlight flickered weakly, casting just enough light to reveal footprints leading from the counter to the door. Wet, muddy prints, but it hadn't rained in weeks. He followed them to the threshold, his voice barely a whisper. "Hello!" Outside, the fog swirled slowly, swallowing the road and the pumps. The black sedan sat there again, engine silent, driver's door open. He took one step forward, then another. The wind rose suddenly, the neon sign buzzing louder. He reached the car and leaned inside. It was empty, except for a single piece of paper on the driver's seat. It was a receipt. His receipt. From tonight. Time-stamped 3 a.m. The sound of the bell above the station door chimed softly behind him. He turned and saw the lights inside flicker on. Through the glass, someone was standing at the counter. Someone wearing his uniform. Eli blinked, staring, unable to breathe. The figure inside turned its head slowly toward him. It was him. The same face. The same coffee cup. The same trembling hand. The figure raised its hand and mouthed something through the glass. "Don't go inside." Then the lights went out. When the morning manager arrived, the store was locked from the inside. Everything was in place, except the clock behind the counter, which had stopped permanently at 3 a.m. The security footage for that hour was blank, replaced by a single frozen frame. Eli standing outside by the pumps, staring at himself through the glass. The narrator's voice fades low, almost tender in tone, as the sound of wind fills the silence. They replaced the cameras, hired new staff, but sometimes on foggy nights, drivers passing by say they see the station lights flicker on. and a man standing at the door watching the road, waiting for someone to come in. Always at 3 a.m. The sound fades completely, leaving only the hum of the highway and the faint buzz of the neon sign that never quite turns off. The night had bled into the early hours of morning, but time felt distorted, as if the world outside had paused, trapped in a dim, endless twilight. A faint mist rolled through the trees surrounding the abandoned motel, its tendrils curling against the cracked windows and broken neon sign that once read vacancy. Now only the letters unsettling flickered in weak, intermittent light. The air was cold, too still, carrying that kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your heart sound louder in your chest. Inside the motel office, the wallpaper had begun to peel, and the faint scent of mildew mixed with something metallic, something faintly like blood. A single desk lamp buzzed on the counter, its cone of light illuminating the old guest book that sat open to a blank page. Dust danced lazily in the glow. Behind the counter, a clock ticked faintly, but its hands were moving backward. Mara stood there, staring at the pages. She had found the motel by accident or maybe fate. The storm had forced her off the highway, and this was the only building with lights. Her phone had no signal, her gas tank was nearly empty, and the road behind her was gone under the thick fog. She had seen no one when she pulled in, but the office door was unlocked, and the key rack behind the counter was full. Every single key had the same number engraved on the tag. 7. She ran her fingers over one of them. Cold. Heavier than it should be. The moment she picked it up, the light above her flickered, and somewhere down the long, dark hallway, a door creaked open. The sound echoed faintly, like a breath held for too long finally escaping. She turned slowly, peering down the corridor that stretched from the office. The wallpaper there was darker, stained in places as if water had leaked through the ceiling years ago. The lights overhead blinked sporadically, casting shifting shadows that made the hall seem alive. She hesitated, then stepped forward, the old wooden floor groaning beneath her shoes. Room 7 was halfway down. The door stood ajar, its brass number plate barely hanging by one screw. She reached out and pushed it open. Inside, the room was small. A bed, a cracked mirror, a single chair facing the window. The air was colder here, so cold she could see her breath. The curtains were drawn, but through a tear in the fabric, she could see the faint glow of the neon sign outside. She turned toward the mirror, and her reflection looked wrong. The lighting made her features seem off, her eyes too dark, her smile slightly delayed when she tested it. She took a step closer. Her reflection didn't. Stood still, staring back. The lamp on the bedside table flickered, and when she turned to glance at it, she caught something in the corner of her vision. Her reflection had moved. Now it was closer to the glass. Her heart pounded. She took a step back. The reflection smiled. A slow, unnatural curve of the lips that didn't reach its eyes. Then, faintly, from somewhere behind her, came a whisper. "You found it." Mara spun around. The room was empty. The door behind her creaked slightly, moving just enough to let a cold draft slip through. She backed toward the exit, fumbling for the handle, but it wouldn't move. She pulled harder, her breath fogging the air. The whisper came again, this time from inside the mirror. "Stay." The reflection tilted its head. Its hand rose and pressed against the glass from the other side. The surface rippled like water, distorting her own face. She stumbled back, hitting the edge of the bed. The lamp went out completely. For a moment, there was only darkness. Then the mirror began to glow faintly, illuminating the room in a pale, silvery light. In the reflection, the room was different. Clean, untouched, with sunlight streaming through open curtains. Her reflection stood in that version, smiling softly. Then it pointed to something beside her. Mara turned. The chair by the window was facing her now. She hadn't touched it, and in that chair sat a person, or what was left of one. Their skin was pale and stretched thin, their eyes sunken, mouth frozen in a silent scream. A motel key hung from their hand. Room 7. Her breath caught in her throat. The air in the room felt heavier, like the walls were closing in. She stumbled toward the door again, pulling with everything she had. Finally gave way, slamming open so hard it cracked the frame. She ran into the hallway, the light bulbs overhead popping one by one as she passed beneath them. The sound followed her, footsteps, just slightly behind, perfectly matching her pace. She didn't look back. The hallway stretched longer now, impossibly so, turning corners that hadn't been there before. She could feel the air shifting, the smell of dust and decay thickening. The doors she passed all had the same number now. 7. Each one slightly open, each one whispering faintly as she passed. She reached the lobby again, or what looked like it. The lamp was still on, the guest book open. But the clock on the wall had stopped completely, its hands frozen at 3:07. The fog outside pressed against the glass doors like a living thing. She hurried to the counter, fumbling for her car keys, for anything that felt real. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grab them. Then, from the corner of the room, a voice spoke again. Her own voice this time, calm and distant. "You shouldn't have opened the door." She looked up. Behind the counter, standing in the dim light, was herself. Same clothes, same hair, but her eyes were dark, all black, like ink spilling across glass. The other Mara smiled faintly. The reflection from the mirror had stepped out. Mara stumbled back, knocking over the lamp. The room plunged into shadow again, and for a moment, she couldn't tell where she was. The air buzzed faintly, the silence punctuated by that same backward ticking of the broken clock. Then, slowly, the light returned, not from the lamp, but from the fog outside. It glowed unnaturally bright, flooding the room with pale white. Through the glass, she could see shapes moving, faint silhouettes walking in slow, steady rhythm toward the motel. Dozens of them, all identical. Each one carried a room key. Mara backed away, clutching her keys to her chest. The fog began seeping under the door, rolling over the floor like water. Her breath quickened. The reflection, or whatever wore her face, stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away. "You opened the wrong door," it whispered, reaching out. Before she could move, the fog surged, swallowing everything, the counter, the walls, the clock. She gasped as her vision blurred, the cold biting into her skin. And then there was silence again. When the fog cleared, the office was empty. The lamp still buzzed faintly, casting light over the guest book. On its open page, a new entry had appeared, written in shaky handwriting. Mara, room 7, checked in, 3:07 a.m. Checked out. Not applicable. Outside, the neon sign flickered once, then steadied, its missing letters glowing again for the first time in years. Vacancy. A few miles down the highway, a driver passing through the fog swore he saw lights from an old motel that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Torn down years ago after a fire. He said a woman stood in the doorway, watching the road, her face pale and familiar, holding a room key that read only one number. 7. The final story fades in with the soft hum of an empty diner at 3 a.m. Neon lights flickering weakly against the rain-slicked glass. A lone waitress wipes the counter, her reflection pale and tired. The bell above the door rings, though no one enters. The jukebox turns on by itself, playing a song from decades ago. She whispers the words under her breath, realizing halfway through she's never heard them before. Outside, a shadow stands beneath the streetlight, unmoving. The diner clock stops. The song skips. The bell rings again. This time, someone whispers her name from right behind her. The stories fade into silence, leaving only the faint hum of night, the kind of quiet that seeps beneath the skin and lingers long after the lights go out. Each tale, a whisper of what hides in darkness, a reminder that the night shift never truly ends for some. The narrator's voice softens, almost comforting, yet edged with unease. So, next time you find yourself alone under flickering lights or hear footsteps when none should be there, remember, some stories don't stay buried. The sound of a distant clock chimes once. Then a breath, a whisper, "Good night." The rain softens to a distant echo as the narrator's voice returns. Calm, reflective, almost tender now. 8 stories. 8 souls who walked into the night and never came back the same. The camera pans through empty places. A flickering diner light, a deserted parking lot, a lone road vanishing into fog. The night shift doesn't just take your time. The voice continues. It takes pieces of you, the parts that stay awake when the world sleeps. A faint hum builds beneath the silence, ending with one final whisper. Remember, some lights were never meant to stay on.